Hi friends, it is Megan. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have quite the video for you because it is my March wrap-up. I read 17 books in March, not including the 3 books that I did not finish, so I have quite the haul of reading reviews to give you today, so I'm just gonna get started. I started with Movie Icons Marilyn Monroe by Taschen. I gave this 1 star because it is primarily a picture book and not anything that I didn't already know. There was about 2 or 3 pages of English text, and it was pulled from a biography that someone else wrote, so this isn't, my favorite book of the month. Then I read The Truth About Forever by Sara Dessen, and this is the story of a girl who loses her dad and has to deal with the grief of that. And I really loved this message. It's not necessarily the type of book that I would reach for out of habit, but I did enjoy it when I was reading it, and I loved the message that it gave and how it dealt with grief and everything of that nature, so I gave it 4 stars. Then I read Conversations with Marilyn by WJ Weatherby, and this is probably one of the only Marilyn Monroe books I will be keeping. I really enjoyed the way that she was portrayed or seen in this book. The only problem I had with it, and the reason that I gave it a 4.5 stars instead of a 5 stars, is because there's the trope of I'm too good to fall for Marilyn like everyone else kind of thing that was pushed really hard in this, and it was like a little overdone. Like, if he said it once, cool, but he pushed it really hard in this book, so that wasn't my favorite. But overall, like, the tone of the story, because it felt more like a story than a biography, and I felt like I had to keep reminding myself that these people are real. It was very noir, film noir-ish, and I felt like I was reading it in an old-timey detective voice, so I just really liked it, so I gave it 4.5 stars. Then I DNF'd The Market by JM Steele. It did have the R word in it regarding people with a mental disability, and I just can't stand that. I've read other books with it in it, but for me this was an immediate DNF just because this is a type of book that I'm not already drawn to, so I was already hesitant to pick it up. But that was like the killer for me. It was like on page 3, so I didn't feel attached to the book or anything at that point, so I was just like, I don't have to deal with this, and bye-bye it goes. I gave it no stars because it was a DNF. Then I read 3 Dark Crowns by Kendare. I actually did a book talk on this, and I love this book. I gave it a 4.5 stars. It is the tale of 3 sisters who each have a special gift, and they are basically sent into a Hunger Games-esque plot to kill each other for one to win the crown in the end, and I loved it. It is a very slow book. It didn't start till probably 95% of the way in, and then the last 30 pages are what gave this the 4.5 stars for me. I loved the characters. I loved most of the relationships. The friendships are really, truly wonderful, but I'm excited to see where the sequels go because I see so much potential in this series. I then read The Last Song by Nicholas Sparks, and this tells the story of a girl whose parents are divorced, and she goes to live with her dad for the summer, and she does not like her dad, so she has to learn to deal with getting to know him again and being his daughter and everything of that nature. I gave it a 3.5 stars. There was some issues with the way that she handled things in the book, and I guess I have to recognize that that's her as a teenager and not necessarily the author, but there's just some things that were read that I didn't necessarily like, so I'm still on the fence about whether to give this a 3.5 or 4 stars. I did really enjoy it, and I did like the message, but there was like the romance part didn't make much sense to me, but I really loved the father-daughter relationship growth, so 3.5 stars. The next book I read is Killer by Shepard, and this is part of the Pretty Little Liars series. As you all know, if you've watched my channel, I'm just powering through these books. I gave this a 2 stars. It's not my favorite. It had a lot of boy drama in it, and that's just not my thing, but I'm inclined enough by the overall mystery and story of that nature that I'm keeping with the series until the end. And they are quick and easy reads, so if I ever just kind of have a book hangover, these are an easy book to pick up to get me back into it. So yeah. So the final book of week 1 of March was The Casual Vacancy by J.K. Rowling. And this book I'm giving a 3 stars. I enjoyed it enough to read the whole thing, but it's definitely not my favorite book. It had a lot of adult themes that I'm just not comfortable reading and everything like that, so I knew going into it wasn't Harry Potter, so it's not that it wasn't Harry Potter, it's just that it's not my type of book, and now I know. But the writing was good enough, and it's definitely a J.K. Rowling work with the way the writing style was, so that's why I ended up giving it 3 stars, because it is a good book, it's just not my type of book. I then read A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab, and this book is everything. That's literally what my review and my little reading journal is. It says, this book is everything. It gave it 5 stars, and it's about Kel, who has the ability to travel between the 4 Londons, Black London, White London, Red London, and Grey London, and all of the hijinks and everything that comes with that. So, such a good book. Can't wait to pick up A Gathering of Shadows for my in-game readathon, and yeah. I then read Nevernight by Jay Kristoff, and this tells the story of Mia, who watched her father die in front of her when she was just a little girl, and her story in seeking revenge by going to a school for assassins. And the first 60 pages of this book were very hard for me to get through just because of the writing style, but in the end I loved this book so much, and I'm so captivated by the story, and I can't wait for Dark Dawn to come out, which is the 3rd book of the trilogy, and I ended up giving this 4.5 stars. The only reason it lost the 0.5 of the star was because I just didn't, it was really hard to push through those first 60 or so pages, and I almost DNF'd it. I'm so glad I didn't. I'm so glad I pushed through, but I totally get the hype now, so I'm so glad that I got the chance to read this, and I have already picked up God's Grave for this month, so stay tuned for that. I then finished the Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone audiobook. It took me the whole month to get through just because I only listened to it while driving, and as always, it's a 5 out of 5 stars for the nostalgia and just the fact that it's Harry Potter. So I wish I had more of I guess less of a bias towards it, but I just really love the series, and 5 out of 5 stars. I then read This Savage Song by Victoria Schwab. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. It just didn't have the same grasp on my heart that A Darker Shade of Magic or Nevernight or any of those things did. It felt like more of a YA story mixed with fantasy rather than just fantasy, and I just really, really love A Darker Shade of Magic, so to read that before this is probably what gave it 4 stars instead of 5. But I do love August. I couldn't connect with Kate as much. I felt she was very closed off, but August is such a cinnamon roll. I did pick up Dark Duet, so I'm excited to read those, and it is signed by Victoria Schwab, so that was pretty cool. Right there. I then read The Gilded Wolves by Roshani Chokshi for the Books with Friends book club put on by Books with Chloe and Mr. Common Spence. And a lot of people didn't like this book, but I gave it 4.5 stars. I have a lot of 4.5 stars. There's all of these great things about the book that just one little thing that didn't quite reach 5 stars. But The Gilded Wolves, I would say, stands between a 4 and a 4.5 stars for me after doing a lot of deliberation, I guess. But it does feel sort of like a B-rated Six of Crows book, but the characters, while they are similar, do have their own personalities and their own stories, and I love them for that. So that is why I gave it such a high rating. I then picked up Marilyn Monroe in the Movies by Timothy Knight, and this is a textbook analyzation of each of her movies from the start of her career till her death. And like I said, it's a textbook like analyzation, so it's not very story-esque. I'm glad I read it just for the sake of reading it, because I really love learning about people's lives and everything like that, so I'm glad I read it for that reason, but I do not think that I'll be keeping it. I gave it a 3 stars because I enjoyed it while I was reading it. It's just not something I love or has my heart, so 3 stars. Then I picked up The Power of a Positive Woman by Karol Ladd, and this just didn't hit the ball for me. I didn't like the message from the get-go, so I ended up DNFing this. Bye-bye. Then I tried to replace that because it was one of my reading prompts, so I tried to replace it with Nice Girls Don't Get the Corner Office, but when I opened the pages, they were completely vandalized, and there were some pages torn out of the book, so I just decided to DNF this as well, because if I couldn't physically read it, then it can't really be read. So in the end, I replaced those prompts and those books with The Taming of the Shrew by Shakespeare. Helps if I hold it the right way. The Taming of the Shrew by Shakespeare, and I'm glad I read this just for the sake of reading a work by Shakespeare, but I gave it 2 stars because I didn't really like it. I didn't like the messages it gave off, but I had to recognize that it was from a different time. So I'm glad I read it for a Shakespeare work, but I didn't like it that much. Then I read Heartless by Sara, Shepard, which is another book in the Pretty Little Liars series. I gave this a 3 stars because I enjoyed it more than most of the books in the series. It had a lot less boy drama and a lot more like solving the mysteries and crimes, so I really enjoyed it for that reason. Then I read Anne of Green Gables, which I gave 4 stars because I love Anne so much. I didn't know this was a series when I began the book, but at the end I felt like there was more to it, so I googled it and it turns out it's a series, so I can't wait to pick up those books. I don't think I'll be keeping this physical copy, but I will be picking up the Barnes & Noble Yellow exclusive edition, so I'm really excited about that. I relate to Anne on such a big level, and she's just one of my favorite characters of all time now. I never expected to like a classic this much, but here we are. Then I read Falling for Marilyn by Karol. This is essentially another picture book because there's about 18 pages of text and then the rest is pictures. In the 18 pages of text, I gave it a 3 stars because I enjoyed it. It felt more like a story than a biography because it told conversations rather than this is when she started, this is when this happened, date. You know what I'm saying? So I enjoyed it for that. I gave it a 3 stars for that, but it's just not something that I see myself picking up in the future, so it's not like my heart was completely in it. And then the last book I read for March was Skyward by Brandon Sanderson. I actually finished this at 11:59 on March 31st. So right before it turned April 1st, I finished this book, so I'm happy to include it in the March wrap-up. And this book has me shooketh. I haven't read many sci-fi. This is probably this is the first sci-fi I can vividly remember reading. And I love a whole new genre now. So I always had the idea I would love sci-fi. I just never got into it actually. So I'm glad I am now, and I'm glad I know for sure I like sci-fi, so that when I tell people I like sci-fi, I'm not just guessing I do. But this tells the story of Spensa, who her father died in the Battle of Alta and was labeled a coward for running, so this tells the story of her trying to gain back that respect and that honor of not being a coward, so she goes to flight school in his honor and all of that. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. So those are the 17 books I read in March. My favorite would probably have to be A Darker Shade of Magic, but Skyward is pretty close behind. I am so glad that I read all of these books and had the chance to discover all of these worlds, and I'm excited to see how many I can read in April. So stay tuned for my book on haul, where I go through all the books I read in March and the books I already had and unhaul them and post about it on here. Also stay tuned for my weekly reading vlogs, where I go through each day talking about my progress in the books I've read. I'm currently doing 2 readathons, the in-game readathon and the Alice Magical readathon, so I've got a lot going on, and hopefully I can finish a lot of books this month. But I look forward to seeing you guys in my next monthly wrap-up, and I will see you in my weekly videos as well. Bye, guys!